So at this point, I am so pleased to introduce our plenary speakers for today, Valerie, Davidson, and Mary Wells, who will be discussing methods of cultivating inclusivity in engineering and how the engineering profession benefits immensely from diversity. Valerie Davidson is a university professor emerita from the University of Guelph with a professional career spanning consulting, food manufacturing, and university teaching and research. Val has been a passionate advocate for women in the STEM fields, including serving as the NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering for Ontario from 2003 until 2011. Under her leadership, the Ontario Network of Women in Engineering was launched, connecting all of the schools and faculties of engineering in Ontario. In 2016, Valerie received the Citizenship Medal and Ontario Professional Engineers Award to recognize her contributions to the engineering community. On a personal note, I was lucky enough to work with Val at the University of Guelph as an undergraduate student and can attest to the power of her mentorship and her passion for reaching and inspiring young women in engineering. Mary Wells is a professor of mechanical and mechatronics engineering at the University of Waterloo and holds the inaugural Associate Dean Outreach for the University of Waterloo's Faculty of Engineering. And how wonderful is it that that position exists at Waterloo? She's also the current chair of the Ontario Network for Women in Engineering. Mary has led various initiatives to uncover the root causes of the continued lack of participation of women in engineering, as well as programs to address these barriers. These activities, reaching over 3,000 young women from across Ontario annually, have exposed young women in elementary and secondary schools to the engineering profession and supported current engineering students along with women working in the profession. I know their talk will inspire us, and I hope many of you will go back to your institutions with a renewed desire for celebrating and promoting diversity. So please give a warm welcome to Professors Valerie Davidson and Professor Mary Wells.
Well, I'm going to help you.
Thank you. We're a team right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning. Okay, so just
Thank you. Yes, we're good. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Lisa. Mary and I are really so delighted that we were invited to be plenary speakers at the CEEA conference today. As it turns out, for both of us, this is the first time we've actually attended the conference. And just participating in the sessions yesterday and listening, our common observation is that this is a very inclusive environment, and we're happy to share some of our work towards improving the inclusivity in engineering. We're looking forward to a great discussion at the end. So, as Lisa said, ONWE was formed in 2005 because we felt that we were just discouraged with the fact that we weren't making great progress in terms of seeing more women coming into engineering, despite a lot of really good efforts. And so the idea that was really important that we achieved on that in 2005 was the idea of collaborating as a group and having a province-wide effort in terms of activities to increase the representation of women in engineering. So I was really happy in 2013 when we needed new leadership for ONWE that Mary CODE, the Council of Ontario Deans of Engineering, chose Mary to take on that leadership role. In the last 4 years, she's taken it to an amazing level with the help of the ONWE members. And a few weeks ago, Mary and I were both in Ottawa because ONWE was recognized. It was awarded the NSERC Award for the 2017 NSERC Award for Science Promotion. So it was a real prestigious award and recognition of the efforts of all of the ONWE members over a number of years. So you're going to hear a little bit more about ONWE as we go on, the activities. The flagship activity is Go Eng Girl. It happens every fall. And it has been happening across Ontario since 2005, but one of the expansions recently is that it's actually been moving out to other provinces in Canada. Right, sorry, okay. So I was very happy with the conference themes. I agree completely that innovation and diversity are connected. And this is an observation from a participant in the Girl Guide badge days. They get their science and technology badges at an Ennui event. And she recognizes that engineers are behind the creation of so many things, so many innovations and products that we use in our everyday life that basically improve the safety and quality of our lives. So if overall women are potentially 50% of the users of these innovations and are impacted by these technologies, they simply must be part of the design process. We need them in the engineering, in the creation of these technologies in order to have better and more effective innovations. And it's not surprising that this is true because, of course, what we need across innovation is a breadth of experience and background and contributions. There is some research that demonstrates this. Reported in the Harvard Business Review, an experiment where about 200 people were randomly assigned into groups, and then the groups worked on a number of tasks. They worked on brainstorming, decision-making, and a complex problem-solving. And the performance of the group collectively was assessed. When they looked at the results, what they found was that the groups that had more women actually had the higher collective intelligence compared to groups that had no gender balance. So this is something that connects, as I said, innovation and diversity. But the other point that I want to make is this. Innovation and design are creative and fun. So at all of the events that we run through Ennui, Badge Days, and Go Eng Girl, there are hands-on activities that the participants engage in teams. And you can see from this comment that they get really excited. I mean, the energy in the room at a Go Eng Girl event is just so high. And this young woman is saying, I would be willing to spend even more time doing this. So this is an important way of engaging young women in basically seeing that not only can they do engineering, but it's actually creative and fun. So the idea is that innovation is a way that we can certainly bring more women into engineering. I think it's in fact true that it's a way to bring young people in general into engineering, but I see it as being particularly fun, particularly important in attracting young women to engineering. So the goals for this presentation are to basically share some of the successful strategies from Ennui, how this collaboration has really changed the landscape of outreach for engineering in Ontario. We're going to talk about the social science research that's known broadly as social identity threat, and you're going to see it woven through a number of the slides, but it basically is important in developing a better understanding of how biases and stereotypes are barriers to the participation of certain groups in engineering. And we're going to talk about the interventions that Ennui has done, as well as other interventions that focus on not just women, but men, because we need to recognize that yes, we can help women understand some of their reactions to some of these stereotypes, but we also need to have men basically become more aware of and respect their female colleagues. And we're going to end up with some discussion of implications for educators, and we're looking forward to your ideas. So this is a pipeline that's commonly used to represent the continuum from early education through the university years, out through graduate studies in this case, to the workplace. And there's a lot of detail on here. I'm not going to try and get you to understand all of it. But what you see at the early end of the pipeline, that is when you move from the elementary school, the early high school ages, you start to see changes in terms of the representation of women in courses that are going to be important as prerequisites for engineering programs. So at first year engineering level, what we're already seeing is we only have basically one woman to every 4 men who would have the courses that would allow them to apply to engineering programs. And then when you look at this bucket, which is the workforce, what our graduates will find, or our students will find when they go out on co-op terms, when they get summer jobs, when they go into employment after they graduate, is that currently in Ontario, about 11% of the registered licensed professional engineers are female. And this is Ontario data, but it's pretty much all true overall across Canada. The leaky pipeline, so engineers are fairly comfortable with this model. It's something that they understand, but no matter how much we know about friction factors and leaky valves, it doesn't, the model is limited. It doesn't tell us why these things are happening, and that's really what we need to know more about in order to see change happening. So one of the things that was very exciting for me over the last 15 years of my career was that we started to work a lot more with social scientists in terms of getting at using their expertise and research methods to understand what is happening in this pipeline in order to design interventions that would be effective at seeing change. And it was the most difficult, most challenging interdisciplinary research that I have done in my career, but it was actually the most interesting. So one of the outcomes that I'm really excited about is it took us a while to, basically develop the relationships with social people in social sciences to be successful. Successful in writing applications for funding to SSHRC in particular. But the outcome that I'm really excited about is this one. It's a recent grant from the SSHRC, from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, for a major piece of research in terms of, it's called Engendering Success in STEM. It's part of the Partnerships Grant Program. Both Mary and I are involved in it. Mary is one of the co-applicants, and she'll be speaking more about some of the details of the project, and I'm a member of the advisory board. But again, it comes back to the pipeline as a starting point, and it recognizes, or it's going to focus on 4 particular sections of the pipeline. It's definitely a collaboration between social science researchers and women such as Mary, who are very active in engineering outreach. And it's major funding for a 7-year period. So this will allow very intense longitudinal studies that focus on these 4 sections and focus on developing interventions that are aimed at what is known to be some of the key obstacles at each point in the pipeline. So in the next few slides, that's what Mary and I are going to talk about, are some of these obstacles and some ideas for the interventions. The one that starts very early at a very early age is the belief that there is a difference between what men do and women do. The belief that is deeply rooted in our social and cultural norms, that means that it associates engineering as being a very masculine activity, and that it's only for boys, as this young woman thought until she attended one of the Go Eng Girl, or the badge days. And it's something that is sometimes is an explicit statement from a teacher, or in my case, it was my guidance counselor in high school who said, girls just don't do engineering. But it also comes through in a lot of social messages that really influence young women, and they form perceptions that are going to affect their choices of, say, high school subjects. So this was one of the key things that ENWI wanted to change, and so it basically, I think, does a lot of different things, but the 2 things that I think are key are, first of all, the role models. The most effective role models are the undergraduate students that help the young women with their hands-on design activity, as you see here. But there are also information fairs that are opportunities for the undergraduates to talk about the extracurricular activities that happen in their engineering school and the way they participate. So these are very effective ways to influence, to change that mindset that only males or only boys do engineering. It's important, I've noted, in many cases, that those role models are not, they're just a few years older than the participants that they're working with, because that means that when these young girls are talking to them, seeing these young women, they can see themselves in the same place in a few years. And that's a lesson that I think you can take in terms of the effectiveness of role models into other areas. So for undergraduate students, the most effective role models are often your alumna who come back to talk to them. But another thing that was really important, right from the beginning, the idea was that we would ask parents to come to Go Eng Girl events. And over the last 12 years of Go Eng Girl, about 9,000 parents have attended. And this is important because, again, they can talk to these undergraduates and they can ask very direct questions and get frank answers. And that really does have, they're much more, they're aware of the new areas of engineering. That's one important thing. But in the surveys that we do at the end of the Go Eng Girl event, a majority of them are saying that after attending this event, they're willing to encourage their daughter to go into engineering. So these are two important things that ONWE has achieved. And what impact has that had on the engineering landscape? Well, Mary's been tracking through the Ontario Application Centre, the female applications to engineering programs since 2005. And what you can see is that over that time period, the increase in the numbers of applications has been over 250%. So I'm so proud of this is what makes me really happy that we created ONWE so long ago and that it's continued to thrive. So, the data is important. Another part of the data that Mary's analyzed is looking at the high school choices, because again, at Go Eng Girl events, it's important that they get information about what courses they need to go into engineering programs. And for a long time, we thought, well, math is the roadblock because, we just think that, girls are avoiding calculus and the advanced functions that they need to get into engineering programs. When you look at the actual data from 2013 from Ontario school boards, you see that actually there are quite a few women in terms of not just the percentage, but the absolute numbers of women who would have the grade 12 prerequisites for engineering. It's quite different from physics. In physics, the total number of students who are taking the grade 12 physics is has dropped by about a third relative to the math. And here we see that now women are now in a minority position in terms of having the prerequisites for engineering programs. Now, this has led a number of schools recently to actually drop the requirement for first-year physics as a prerequisite for engineering admission. So I mentioned the work of the social sciences, and this is a tool that was developed by psychologists to look at the perceived fit and the self-efficacy and it was applied in an introductory physics class. You can see that the first set of statements deals with the identity as a physicist, and in this case, the statement, the responses are coded in terms of whether they are favorable to creating a sense of belonging as well as a stronger identity for physics. So, for example, the third statement, I feel like I didn't belong in this class. If the students disagree with that, that would be a favorable response. So you're not looking at how many people agree with all of these statements. That's the first point I want to make. Basically, for those two, the favorable responses are reported by gender in the final two columns. And what you see is that for all of the first three statements, for men, they have a stronger sense of belonging as well as that they can do physics. And it's not, the sense of belonging is not because of, whether they can find friends or relate to other people in the class, that there's no gender difference on that. It's in the core areas of things like, I feel I could be a good physicist. And so it's really not surprising then to see when another tool is used to look at self-efficacy or confidence, and in this case, all of the statements are pointing to a lower self-efficacy. So the disagreement from males would indicate that they're more confident. So in this case, again, the gender difference is that women are feeling less confident about their ability to do physics. And this was taken from a presentation that Chris Meyer made at the Ontario Association of Physics Teachers last year. I think there are probably a number of people in the room that know Chris Meyer's work. There's a lot on his website if you're interested. So when we think about interventions that may be useful in terms of countering this lack of fit, a number of interventions are tried. And this report in the physics education research a few years ago looked at a number of these possible interventions and made this discovery that in fact the one that was the most significant, most effective way to counter the lack of fit was to explicitly discuss the underrepresentation of women in physical sciences with the class. And it's, it may be not the first thing you think of in coming up with an intervention, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Because the discussion was around counteracting the stereotypes, affirming personal values, and it really helped female students to realize that their feelings of discomfort are stemming from the external norms and pressures, not their own capabilities. But the other thing that I think is really interesting about this observation or this intervention is that both male and female faculties can facilitate this discussion. So again, we want to make it clear that we need men to engage in this discussion.
I don't know. Can everybody hear me in the back? Is the mic on okay? It's good? Okay, thank you. So like Val, I'm very pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about ENWI, which I'm very proud to be the chair of right now, but also to talk more specifically about a few interventions we've been doing at the University of Waterloo between the Faculty of Engineering and the Faculty of Arts, the social scientists, that has really led me to understand to a greater degree ways we can support students. And although I'm looking at a gender diversity lens in this presentation, I think many of the things we will present in terms of supporting students will apply to other students, Indigenous students, other students that may feel they don't belong in engineering, and how can we support those students so that everyone does thrive. So I'm just going to get into a little bit on the mindset issues. I think there's a lot of talk these days around unconscious bias. Google's done a lot of stuff where they have modules now to teach people about unconscious bias. When you think about the way our minds work, and I think there's been a lot of interesting research that we are really starting to understand how our brain works and how our minds works. It can really be divided into, I guess, two types of systems. There's the reflective system, and speaking to all of you here today, we do tend to be reflective people as professors, as educators, where we make deliberate decisions that are based on reasoning, objectively. These are effort. It requires a deeper thought process to be able to do this. It requires motivation to do it, and it takes more time. And inherently in our jobs and what we do, we tend to be more like that. There is, however, another part of our brains, and they will influence all of us as well, which is the reflexive system for automatic processing, and they've called it System 1. And this is where we start to rely on these implicit associations that we have developed and procedures. And these are associations that help us encode vast amount of information from early on in childhood and allow us to create very fast patterns in our head as to what the outcomes will be. So it requires very little effort, and they're very fast. And I know sometimes when I'm driving to go get the groceries, I don't even remember how I got there. Like, it's just these implicit associations. I've done it so repetitively that it's encoded in my mind how to do that. And so these are the ones, and really they've even kind of measured these things. There's different neural structures that are going on that represent the two. And it's really this reflexive system that we need to be concerned about. And it's not just men that have these implicit associations, women do as well, and they really are very similar in some sense. And when we think about how these implicit associations form, as I said, they inform early in childhood. They can be measured. Now, how many people here have taken that implicit association test? Okay, so a couple. If you haven't, it's a good way to do it. I actually did it last night just to see, and I've realized I'm moderately biased towards men in engineering, which isn't good, although I've been working in women in engineering for so long. I think it's also the way they sequenced it, so it's at the end and they mix you up a little bit, so I'm not sure. But they're really learned from seeing different groups unevenly divided into different roles. So we think about a couple of these. For example, again, if you grow up and you see more engineers in male roles, you start to make that association that engineer equals male more than female. And again, we saw with even as young as girls in grades 3, 4, 5, they start to make that association, both the girls in the class but also boys in the class, that these are the roles that we play. If we think about another kind of example, again, if we see racial disparities in rates of crime and incarceration, we again start to form the link in our minds that black equals bad more than good. And so that we start to form those implicit associations with respect to that. And then a final example might be, again, if we see that child care is mostly done by women and women go into more of the caring professions, we start to form the link that women equals family more than career, and women are supportive, caring, nurturing. These are the roles they play in our society, whereas men play different kinds of roles. And it's really these ideas as engineering educators that we need to kind of combat, especially if we hope to invite and make a welcoming and inclusive environment for more women to come in, but also other groups of people that might not normally be associated with what engineering is and what they do. If we think about, this is just some very recent work that was just published, but again, what are the implicit gender associations in engineering? I don't think it's any surprise to anybody. So 0 would be no association. You just got a neutral view of what it is. And this would be on some of those implicit assessment tests that are done. So this is interesting. It's sort of first-year engineering students in blue. Here's the male response. So definitely the male feel that engineering is associated with more men than women. Women would be down in here. But the women also feel that way. And interestingly enough, if we now look at professional engineers, the men still feel it about the same way as the first-year students, but the women feel it even more. That in the professional sense, their view is that engineering is very male. No one right now, men or women, believe that engineering is associated with women. And I'm not going to show it, it's a kind of a busy graph, but you can see this around the world. This isn't just in North America. And any country where you have a number of female role models that are more scientists, you see that implicit association does go down. So this is a worldwide phenomenon in terms of what can happen. So we think about this idea of stereotype threat and how it will manifest itself in the behavior of the people that are under it. Again, I think it's very well established that this is a real thing that can occur to people, and also the way that it will affect their performance. So the cue to the threat may be, if you're in that environment and you are reminded that, I'm now in engineering as a young woman, women don't normally go into engineering, so anything that can cue that threat will start to alter your behavior in a very unconscious or subconscious way so that you don't even realize that you're being affected by it. The cues may be being a token. So for anybody that has this idea of making quotas where you're taking women in that aren't equally as capable as men academically, that would absolutely be the wrongest thing you could do, because the women, if they are led to believe that they're there because of tokenism versus being there based on their own merit, will exasperate this behavior. So please don't do that. If there's subtle sexist behavior, it doesn't have to be overt. Subtle little things that are happening. I don't know, a male faculty member making a small joke or speaking in a different way to the female compared to the man, maybe touching her arm. Anything like this may, again, trigger this reaction that you're under the stereotype threat. And also, the third is performing under pressure. If you're doing a very difficult engineering test, and again, you don't feel that it's a very difficult test, you start to feel, I'm not going to do as well. How does it manifest itself? In poor performance. So if we think about the female students that we're bringing in now, if they're getting an 85%, that may not be a true reflection of their ability. They may be able to get a 95%. And some of the work we've done at Waterloo shows some of these interventions can help to allow that natural ability, that latent ability of women to shine through in terms of their grades. So it may be that their grades are suffering a little bit because of that. They will start to feel stress and anxiety on a daily basis that maybe the other students aren't feeling. And this can lead to burnout, it can lead to higher levels of anxiety, and eventually it could be that they will leave and avoid the profession. And I think we see this clearly in our own profession, where we're graduating a number of female students. Many of them are choosing not to enter into the profession, and this is a major issue. We spend a huge amount of time. These are highly intelligent people. They're trained in engineering. We need to hear their voices, and yet they're exiting out, they're avoiding going into it, because who wants to work in a job where you're feeling stressed every day? And again, that's just some of the references to the work that clearly shows us. How does this manifest itself in our classrooms? So I've been teaching for about 20 years. I think there's a number of ways it manifests itself in our classrooms, and I think we can all think of ways that it does. One example here, this was actually some data from UBC in a physics classroom, this was just looking at following when you're doing a hands-on lab or something like this. This was looking at sort of Hooke's Law lab where they're doing measurement, and this is looking at sort of the number of male and female pairs that were together and the fraction of time that the females were using the equipment. And right away you see there's a tendency for the men who are so eager and excited to just kind of go in, start using all the equipment. The women tend to hang back and watch, and so it kind of reinforces that stereotype that the men are really good at these things. I don't know if I'm as good at these things. So it's something we need to be aware of. One of my major frustrations is at Waterloo is often when I'm doing group work, I'm teaching a manufacturing processes course right now, we do an engine dissection component with it. There's groups of 4. Often the men will do the technical part of the work and leave the women to do, the communication, writing up the report and things like that. And the men want it to be this way, and so do the women. They fall to what they feel are their natural areas of strength. Again, as educators, we need to force the women to do the technical work and force the men to practice writing and speaking, because they both can, learn from that and become better engineers at the end. I remember one case in a 4th-year capstone design project at Waterloo where one of the young women was in a group and she came to see me. She had wanted to do some of the calculations for a vibration. The male student was saying, no, I'm going to do them. You are not allowed. She eventually had to show her transcript to him, where she actually got a higher mark on the vibrations course than he did. And finally, he let her do it. But he really believed he was better at it. He wasn't trying to be mean to her. He really thought, for the purpose of the project and getting the best outcome, it was best if he did those things and she did those. So it was a very frustrating experience for her. And I'm so pleased she had the gumption to do that. I don't know if I would have, but she did, and I was really proud of her for doing that. The other thing I found as a faculty member is, as I started my career, my chair at the time really thought that I would be good at, nurturing the grad students and doing these things. So you do also see in the service roles men and women are given in our faculties, they kind of manifest these implicit associations. Men are going to do the difficult strategic planning, women are going to do the awards and helping people feel good in the environment. So as leaders, please try not to do that as much and kind of mix it up a bit. Both can learn from these different experiences. So I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of interventions we've done at Waterloo. These have happened over about a decade. And again, it's been this really, really nice collaboration between the Faculty of Engineering and the Faculty of Arts. And we just have some fabulous people that are in the social psychology research that have done stuff there. So the first one was, we know that women are under stereotype threat. And I said these interventions aren't just for women. I think they could be used for other things. And in my engineering complex mind, they seem so simple to me that they seem to work. So I'm really, really pleased by it. But really, we were looking at 2 interventions to help women cope with subtle sexism that was going on, as well as being under the stereotype threat. The first one was what we call a social belonging intervention, and we often do it in first year because this is a time of great transition and a time where you're open to maybe changing who you are and adapting into your new environment. So we did that, and at Waterloo, I think, as you know, it's a direct entry. So right away, you're moving into engineering disciplines, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and some of those disciplines have a much higher fraction of women than others. And so we'll see, actually, that it's the women that are most at risk in the programs that have the fewest numbers: mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, mechatronics engineering, computer engineering, and software engineering at Waterloo. These are all the ones that at the time we were doing this had less than 20% women, and these were the women that really were much more in distress, and you'll see that from some of the data. So the social belonging intervention was really quite simple. We kind of interviewed some of the engineering students to begin with, the female students, to find out what were some of their concerns. It really came down to two key things. Number one, they were quite concerned that their male colleagues would not respect them in terms of their abilities. And number two, they were also concerned potentially going into a very, very heavily male-dominated environment. How would they fit in? How would they feel like they belong? Would they have the same interests? And so based on that knowledge, the social psychologists crafted key messages that were then delivered by upper year students around, as you enter into university, what kind of things you would expect. And so the messages really said that, these upper year students talking, saying, when I first joined Waterloo, I didn't feel like I belonged. I was really anxious. It's very normal to feel anxious. Everybody feels anxious when you're first starting. You're coming from high school. You're going to a much bigger place. It's a higher workload. But this will change over time. And eventually, you will develop a sense of belonging. And to address those kind of two concerns they had, they did talk about the fact that although they were in programs that were dominated by men, and they may have different interests, their interest in engineering was similar. And so that was a common place to bond between them. For the control group, they just did what Waterloo normally does and talked about study skills, what they should do in a kind of very prescriptive way. This is how you should study, this is how you should organize your time, which is what we normally do. The second intervention they did was what they called an affirmation training intervention, where again, they wanted the people, and they did this to both men and women, to think about what were some of the values that they held dear to themselves. It could be around learning, it could be around family relationships, it could be trying to make the world a better place. There was about a list of 6 values that they asked them to think about and then describe why that value was important to them and what it meant to them. Again, they had sort of upper year students where they had in a video talking about how, again, when they first entered engineering, they were overwhelmed by the workload. This was very normal, but over time, they found ways to fit in and also to integrate in some of their own interests into the engineering landscape, and what a great experience that was. Now, one of the things the psychology research showed that is if you had a physical representation of this, it would remind you of these things over time. So for the social belonging one, they gave the students a little keychain with the Waterloo logo on it to remind them that they belonged to that place. For the affirmation, they gave a little keychain where they wrote down their value, put it on a little slip of paper, and put it inside. So they were carrying that value with them at all times. So this is the data. It was just published in 2014. Where they did this, and again, so it divides into 2 things. Here's sort of looking at, this is GPA on the scale right here, after first year. And so here we've got the gender diverse majors, what they call, so these would have been our chemical engineering, our systems design engineering, all these programs that have greater than 20% women. Over here we've got the male dominated majors, my department, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, etc. So the control condition is just the white. Here's the men and women. We've got the social belonging intervention and the affirmation training intervention. So you can see for the men, first of all, they help a little bit, but it's all about the same. Nothing really changes. And again, the men, whether they're in these disciplines or these disciplines, they're pretty much the same. Nothing really changes. For the women, and this was a bit of an anomalous result, they're not sure if it's something real or it's something they would like to look at again. Again, they found that the women that were in the more diverse majors, it didn't really matter. They were doing fairly well anyway in terms of their marks, that these things, they might have made them feel a little bit better, but it didn't really matter in terms of a GPA. However, look at this. Look at how these women are doing with their GPA in these disciplines where they are under the stereotype threat and really feel it. Huge discrepancy in the GPAs. Look at what happens after these very simple interventions. Suddenly their latent ability, you've kind of unleashed their potential, they've been relieved of a little bit of the stereotype threat, and they're now able to perform at the level that they're capable of. So huge effect in terms of that. That's one thing we can measure. How do they do academically? The other thing that they looked at was looking at sort of the perceived importance of daily negative events. After these interventions, I think it was sort of 2 little videos that they watched, They then were asked to do some surveys to think about what were some of the negative experiences that had occurred and to keep them in perspective. So they had some kind of writing and surveys to do to think a little bit about that and to measure that. Again, these are sort of these are the male-dominated measures. This is sort of the perceived importance of daily negative events. And so again, you can see the control condition. The men aren't too worried about some of these negative events, but again, look at the women. They're maybe overreacting a little bit to some things that are occurring and thinking, oh, this is happening, maybe I don't belong here, maybe they're constantly questioning their decision to be in there, should I be in there or not? Again, by having these interventions, and both seem to work equally well, where they hear that it's very normal to feel this way, they're able to kind of manage that more easily and keep it in perspective. This is their confidence now in their ability to handle daily school stresses. Again, for the men, they're fairly confident. These interventions don't really help them too much. For the women, again, it helps to boost them just a little bit. That yes, I will be able to overcome this. Yes, I will be successful. And again, here maybe again, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy. How well will I do? Do I feel I will be successful in engineering? These kinds of questions. Again, we see a huge impact in terms of these interventions on the women's view of their ability to succeed and be successful in engineering. So I think this is something, again, these kinds of interventions can be applied to women, but they can also be applied to other groups to help them. And why not just do it for everybody? It seems to help everybody, I think. So these are the kinds of best practices that we should be doing as the students come into first year for transition. And so this is just a little bit more about that. And again, looking at the current experience, I think they wanted to see, well, does this last? We did it in first term. We were measuring these things in first year. Does it kind of replicate itself into the second semester? So again, here was the intervention session for the men. Here was second semester again. Here was the intervention session in terms of what their current experience is. It appears that it is still lasting into the second term. So even though it was done right away at the beginning of first year, it is lasting. We still need to see how far that can go. Maybe we need a little booster shot in second year or third year or something like that. Okay. Now the one that I'm quite interested in and we're kind of doing right now is one to not try and help the women cope in an environment, to change what the environment is like. And so we've been working again with Steve Spencer at the University of Waterloo to look at ways to change the male respect towards their female colleagues. So this is fairly recent work. Some of the master's graduate students have just been graduating last year, so there's nothing published yet. It's on the verge of it. But really there were 4 conditions that they looked at. And one of them was sort of, a self-affirmation for the men. And part of this, again, is for them to think about a value. And what I've learned from the social psychologists is that by doing this, you open up someone's mind to the possibility of nudging it, changing it, to accept something they might normally reject outright. And I've actually used this with my husband quite a bit, and it's very effective. So it's very, very good, and I'm going to continue to use it. So then following that was this persuasive appeal to talk about the fact that women are under stereotype threat, and that if your colleague has a 90, she actually, and you have a 90, she actually may be more capable than you in terms of her latent ability. It's just being hampered by the stereotype threat. And they use a scenario of someone running with ankle weights. And if we were to take off the ankle weights, they would be able to run so much more quickly. So that was one of them they called the 2-step. They'd use the control condition, which just had the persuasive appeal without that first affirmation. That you'll see that's not as effective. They used a contact condition, and this is, I guess, in the social, what they call the gold standard. Often, and they did this a lot in the States with the racial tensions between white and black, if you put people in contact and working with each other, it helps to mitigate feelings of those implicit associations and develop relationships and respect between each other. So that's what they call the gold standard. And this was really, they created in first year a series of interactions where they were forced to work together. So everybody had a role to play. So for example, if it was building a bridge, one person had the popsicle sticks, one person had the glue, and you had to maintain that role. So it avoided the men going in and doing it all and the women hanging back. They each had a role, and that's what they mean by the jigsaw exercises. And then a control condition in which they did the same exercise but without that jigsaw component. They just let things happen naturally. And that was what they called it, the contact control. So again, if we look at now what the male respect was, how did they try and measure it? They looked at a couple of things. The first thing I wanted to show you is this kind of rating of respect for women in their group. And these would have been the jigsaw groups that they would have done. And they just sort of surveyed the men and the women, just to say, well, what do you think about your group members, and what do you think about your female group members or your male group members? And so very clearly you can see that just with the contact control conditions. So this is where the men just went in and did it all on their own. The women held back. Obviously, they don't have as much respect for women because the women really haven't participated as much. They haven't seen what their abilities are. In the contact one, you can see it's fairly good, but the affirmation plus persuasion was also very good. So it helped to nudge the male mindset a little bit about their female colleagues' abilities as engineers, as future engineers. The second thing they did was, another question they asked. The other thing that they did in the intervention that I think was quite important, and again, something we can do as educators, is with the TAs that were working with the students, they asked the TAs to model respect for each other. They had a male TA and a female TA, and they modeled respect for each other. And these are really the people the students are looking for as role models and what it means to be an engineer. So I think that was actually quite an important component. And so they asked them to rate the TAs on a scale of 1 to 11 or something. And again, you can see here's the students, the male TA, how the males rated them, and here's the female TA. So again, if we look at sort of just the contact condition, although it did very well within the group, it doesn't extend beyond the group to women outside the group they'd interacted with. Still, for the women outside the group that they'd had the direct interaction with, it wasn't affecting their mindset. However, if you look at the affirmation plus persuasion, they were able to take that knowledge that the women group are very capable, perhaps more capable than I believe they are, and extended both to people within their group, but also now to people outside their group, to the point where they thought the female TA was equally as good as the male TA. Again, for these, obviously, it's all going to be about the same. The final thing was they hired a research assistant that was a psychology student. I think she was fairly attractive from what I hear. And they asked her to interview the men. This was a purposeful thing, I guess, from the way they designed the experiment. And so she kind of coded them in terms of how, and she was asking some questions about their design projects. And she was asking questions about what it was, what had happened and things like that. And she kind of coded, she didn't know who had gone through what condition, but she coded their responses in terms of how respectful they felt she was to them. And again, what we see clearly is that it's the affirmation plus persuasion that really stands out as a way to nudge the male mindset to be able to respect their female colleagues. And I think, again, this is a very simple thing to do. It will help our male students as they finish engineering and move into roles where they're going to be working with diverse people. And it helps the female students by changing that environment just slightly. So what are implications for educators? That's just a couple of examples. Again, I think that all of us as educators can play a role in creating identity-safe environments. I think we need to have open discussions about what stereotype threat is, how it can manifest itself, and what are the things that can create that environment and also mitigate that environment. I think we want to encourage students to see intelligence as malleable rather than fixed, and so that there is a potential for growth and changes in that. We should be using diverse discussions, and I hope we are, and I'm sure many of you are. You're some of the exemplars in terms of our educators, to showcase a range of role models in engineering, again, so that people can aspire to be whatever they are and to see this diversity. And again, modeling respect for colleagues that are different they are, and talking to our TAs about making sure they are going to do that in a respectful way. And I think that, really explicitly letting the students know they're welcome and supported, no matter what their background is. And actually, I am teaching this term right now, and for the first time ever, in the first lecture you talk about academic integrity, etc. I actually put up a slide on diversity and what I wanted the learning environment to be like, and the students loved it. Just in terms of, I was supportive of all your environments. If anything happens in the class that you feel is offensive to you, please come and see me. And I'm also learning about identities and what it means and how to create these spaces, and so please let me know. And the students absolutely loved it. It's the first time I've ever done it. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, because I know we're running out of time, is what Val had mentioned, this really exciting initiative, this Engendering Success in STEM, where it's going to be $7 million over 7 years. That's huge for a SSHRC grant. This will be a game changer for us, I believe. It will finally give us some real insight into the mindset as these different points in the pipeline, from elementary school through to high school, university, and then the workplace as well. around what some of these key obstacles are, and then really understanding interventions and techniques, best practices that can help alter, nudge the girls' mindset at different points in the pipeline, and you can get a sense of what those key obstacles are, but also the boys and male mindset at different points in the pipeline to also help understand what these best practices are so that we know what we can do as educators to create these more inclusive environments. And this is just a picture of all the people involved. Again, these are all the social psychologists. These are the experts in the science of gender bias. So Toni Schmader's at the University of British Columbia. She's leading the entire project. These are some of the other ones. And then we've got experts in sort of the science of bias reduction. And here we're sort of classified as the STEM experts. So it is a national consortia. ONWE's involved in it, we're involved in it. It's an opportunity for us in the future to bring back best practices to this venue, and I'm really excited by it. So thank you very much for listening, and I think we can answer a few questions. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's kind of late, but. Oh, sure. Yes.
Thank you very much for both your presentations. So I have kind of a two-part question. And I don't want to take away from any of the important work that
Sure.
you've been doing. But I'm just wondering if ONWE or anyone else you know has been looking at the experiences of transgender folks or gender non-binary folks in engineering.
Yeah,
And
good
also,
point.
Looking at intersections of race, class, ability, while also looking at gender.
Well, maybe I'll start to answer. In terms of the first thing you mentioned, the transgender and things, we haven't really been looking at it. I think it's something that everybody's becoming more aware of, and well, we're starting to look at a little bit more, but no, I think that's an area that definitely we need someone to look at. In terms of some of the other people you're talking about, we've taken that social belonging intervention we did for women, and we've now expanded it to all sorts of groups, both groups from lower social economic status. It's being done in conjunction with some university and state, so they're definitely interested in race, Latino, African American, not just in engineering, but across in terms of success at universities. At Waterloo, we're focusing a little bit on the STEM because Waterloo has, a huge amount of engineering and computer science and things. But those things are going on. But I don't think they're dealing with the kind of transgender issue. And I think that is another area that we do absolutely need to look at. So.
And I'll just quickly add to the second question. I think it's an important next step in terms of recognizing these intersections, because I know, and I'm guilty of it as well, we tend to think that women are a very homogeneous group, but they're not, because of the aspects that you mentioned, plus all the experiences. So there has been work recently that I've been involved with one of the professional engineering associations, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, looking at a mentoring program, and what we were, one of the things that was key was recognizing the different needs for women who have international training who are coming to Canada from another country. And so I think that certainly, again, opened my eyes to the need to move further on this.
Okay. Christine, do you have something?
Yeah, thank you very much for a very insightful talk, and also for everything you have done to increase the awareness of engineering and that possibility for young girls that we are seeing really the outcome in larger number of women applying to engineering. So my question is if you can shed some light into how some of these interventions can be applied at the faculty level. So role models
Good
are
point, yeah.
at all levels.
Sure.
We do need also gender role models as well as diversity
Absolutely.
of sorts
Absolutely, yeah.
in the faculty, for faculty members, because those are where graduate students and undergraduates looked at.
Absolutely. So did everybody hear Dean Amont's question? So she was asking some of the interventions I was speaking about, is it possible to be applying them at the faculty level? What can we do for the faculty? Well, I asked the social psychologist that question myself, and he said there's not much that can be done, unfortunately. No, I'm sort of joking. He said for the people that have been there many, many years, they're kind of set in their mindset. He said the time to do it is when new faculty are starting. You do orientations, talk about, because these interventions are most effective at times of great transition. You're entering first year, you're entering the workplace for the first time, you're becoming a faculty member for the very first time. We could have orientations where we talk about, I think we talk about these definitely, and make them more aware. And I know in terms of the colleagues that have recently started at the University of Waterloo, they're interested in these things, they're thinking about them themselves. So I don't think at Waterloo we do a great thing around faculty orientation, but I think it's things we need to integrate in. So I would say it's when they're starting. That is the best time, my understanding is, to do these things. The faculty members have been there already 20 years, and I'm one of those people. It's too late, I guess, I don't know, unless they want to learn about them.
You're malleable.
I don't know if I am anymore. Yes. Oh, sorry, okay. Okay, oops.
I would assume that female faculty are also role models.
Absolutely.
Okay. Have there been studies to look at if there are male biases against female instructors? Do they think that they are less competent than male instructors?
I think, I haven't seen those specific studies, but again, with these implicit biases, everybody, not just the men, the women too, believe that the males are more competent than the females and that they're better at the science and engineering. So it's not just the males, I don't think, it's the females also. So we have to counteract all of these biases. So. But I haven't seen any studies specifically related to that. I don't know if you have, Val. But.
No, I haven't seen studies. There's been a lot of discussion about that in terms of, and particularly around how does it influence teaching evaluations? Yeah. And I thought that was funny. It's challenging. The group of NSERC chairs, talked about it, but it gets into a lot of challenges in terms of trying to do the study, and it hasn't been, not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen anything.
I know there's a question over there, but we'll answer it afterwards. If there's, come and see us afterwards. So I think you have to move on. Yeah. Yeah.
Once again, thanks, Valerie.
Okay. You happy with the way it went? Thank you very much.
I did. You just didn't see them.